Now, that could be too deterministic, right? It might be silly for me to say that the cycle would have to be over. After all, why couldn't Bitcoin go down there and then just bounce to a new high? Like, why can that not be a thing? Well, it could be. And that's why I say, like, it probably would be not the wisest thing for me to be too deterministic about that. But with, with everything going on, with inflation being an issue and the unemployment rate sort of slowly trending up and whatnot, with all that stuff kind of going on, it would be hard. And especially, seeing this QQQ, what it did, and the S&P in the 1970s when the unemployment rate and the inflation rate were not well behaved, it'd be hard to assume it would be anything other than that. But what you'll see is that when the QQQ got that drop, it did get a rally back up that topped in August. Okay? Now, what's interesting about post-election years is that they're very different from other years. Do you guys remember how in 2024, I called for a summer lull? And we got it, right? We said a 6 to 9 month bleed where it definitely would go down in the summer. And that's what happened. In 2023, we called for a summer lull. And it happened, right? Where the market just didn't do anything in the summer. That's fairly normal for Bitcoin to not really do anything in the summer months. But if it's you could argue whether it's a right translated cycle or a left translated cycle, this summer might not be a summer lull. And this is why I would say that. When it was a left translated peak with the QQQ, the market went up in the summer, right? The market generally trended higher after a massive drop. The market trended up. If you look at quarterly returns for Bitcoin, what do you notice about 2017? Q1, Bitcoin only went up 9%. Q2 and Q3, Bitcoin went up a lot. So you could argue that whether it's a left translated peak or a right translated peak, the summer might not be that bad. The only issue is that it might be trending up from a lower price than it is right now if it's a left translated peak, right? I mean, it could do something like this where it drops and then rallies back up, only to then just be a left translated peak in sort of late summer, and then it falls off in Q4 rather than rally in Q4, and then that brings on the 2026 recession. I'm watching Bitcoin, these weekly candles, very closely here, because if you get a sort of a big teardrop candle where it does, essentially what the QQQ did right here, where it just gets a massive drop, and then it closed that week. I mean, it closed that week at around 80, but it still had a massive drop into the 60s. I would probably operate under the assumption that it's left translated. But even though I would operate under that assumption, I would expect a counter trend rally that would last a few months. So for Bitcoin, if it plays out like a left translated peak, like the QQQ, you would expect something like this, like that. And then you would just get a sort of a macro lower high in Q2, Q3, and then the market would just sell off in Q4 into the 2026 recession, right? That's what you would expect for a left translated peak, where, you're basically testing that prior high. The thing about left translated peaks is that they tend to give you a macro lower high in the second or third quarter of the year. Sometimes I think even in the fourth quarter, but it's still a lower high. So like in 1968, the market topped. You can see that the market dropped in January and then sort of a double bottom in March. And then after, in late March 24th, which is when I think the stock market might find renewed strength, March 24th, it went into a macro lower high in May. Okay? Now look at the next left translated peak. It topped in January. It went down into August. That was an even bigger drop. And then you had a macro lower high in October. But it was still sort of a macro lower high where you could have gotten out only, 7% below the prior high. And this was about 3% below the prior high. But that, the markets don't normally trend down during that time unless it's a left translated peak. So that's what I would say with Bitcoin. If it's left translated, it would likely look something like that, where you get a drop and then a counter trend rally that lasts a few months. I would say at least a couple of months, probably, if not 3 or 4, followed by a drop later on this year. And I don't know what would trigger it. I mean, it could be a bad unemployment rate print. It could be any number of things. I don't really know. Maybe it's Powell coming out and saying no QE or something, which he's already made clear plenty of times that they're not going to begin QE anytime soon. They might end QT, but just because they end QT doesn't mean they're going to start QE. So you have to wonder. I mean, you have to at least wonder if that's something to consider. And I think I think there's enough things going on in the market right now to at least consider it. I mean, I don't think if anyone told you a year from now or 30 years from now that you had a left translated peak, the cycle that the president of the United States launched a meme coin, I don't think you'd be that surprised. I want to be optimistic, right? I really, when I first joined crypto a long time ago, it was so easy to be optimistic about just the asset class in general and just be excited about the newest innovations and stuff and wondering always how it might change the world. And then this cycle has been completely different. It's just been about ETFs and strategic reserves and meme coins. That's all this cycle has been really about. And I want to feel that energy for the asset class again. I just feel like it's so easy for the asset class. I feel like a lot of people lost their way, and a lot of the